too hateful. I don't know. Welcome back to Unauthorized Opinions. Joining me, of course, John F. Trent, That Park Place, back again. Mark Kern, one of the O-est of G's, we'll call him, in the gaming industry. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good. Thanks for having me on the show. Lots
Of
happening.
course.
Lots happening.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
I'm
already... Go ahead.
staying extremely busy. There's so much happening.
We're already in the middle of it. Let's jump into the Zau stuff. This game, you guys. What I was saying to John before we got on here was some of the stuff, I know I should expect it, but at this point, I shouldn't be surprised, but I always am when with the outright lying, this isn't happening, these games aren't doing this, this guy's not involved in that one, Sweet Baby Inc. doesn't have their hand involved in that. And you look at the screenshots, you connect, the dots aren't hard to connect, you guys, of who worked for who and who works with who. And this, what's the other company called? It's basically Sweet Baby Inc. Sugar Baby, Sucre Bebe for our French Canadians out there. Mark, BB, Mark, how did this come onto your radar? Have you been tracking something like this when it first announced and when Sweet Baby Inc. dropped it on like their blog or something like that in January, or does this sort of stuff get sent to you and you start connecting the dots from there?
You know, I first started noticing it when the narrative started up, right? That if you didn't like Zau, you were racist, right? And they were really pushing hard. You could see these pushes on Twitter. You know, just like in gaming, it's time to push, right? When your side's in PvP, you could see this push happening, and I was paying attention to it because Kabrutus's tweet about the game took off. It's got over 3.5 million impressions. And I was like, why is this getting so much traffic? And I realized that they were picking up on it to try to launch this narrative and trying to cherry pick like the worst comments possible to paint the entire Kabrutus movement as, you know, racist and fueled by hate and all this stuff. And it just it got me looking into it. And and someone did send me something and said, hey, I didn't tweet this, but look at one of these replies, and it was a Twitter user who I gave credit to. I can't remember his name right now, but it's on my Twitter feed. If you look, he pointed out that the creator of the game, Zau, which has been in development for 15 years, by the way, apparently, the creator of the game, Zau, it was actually served on a board of directors for a company called Bebe Sucre, right? Which is sugar baby, I guess, in
Sweet
French.
baby.
Sweet baby. Yep. Sweet or yeah. Sugar. And literally served on a board with the founders, the two founders of Sweet Baby Inc., as well as one of the key creative writers who was very outspoken about when the SBI stuff hit. So it pretty much effectively means that this person is not some innocent indie game creator. They were trying to say this is an innocent indie game creator caught up in the SBI turmoil, that they just had a bad accidental relationship with SBI and they shouldn't be penalized for it. But this guy is in bed with them. This guy is working alongside them in a company named essentially the same thing as Sweet Baby Inc. And who knows what the purpose was, but probably is friends with these people. So this is effectively directly a Sweet Baby game. And you know, you can think about it. And so, you know, while it may, you know, I've heard various things like, oh, it doesn't pander, it's not woke or anything like that. But this person serves every, you know, the same sort of political agenda, right? It's a UK based firm, just like Sweet Baby's UK based. All these people are together, and it makes you have to ask some really hard questions about this game.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
so
Yeah, go ahead and jump in, John. I just wanted to bring up the charts that you brought up of their active players on their launch, which was abysmal. What were you gonna say though?
yeah, I agree with Mark. I think this was an absolutely coordinated attempt. I think that they actually were trying to use Salim Abubakar's dad's death as a shield for the game, because he did talk about that in an interview with Games Insider, I guess, a month ago. And I definitely feel like they watched that interview. They had this all planned, that's what they were going to do. And then they also had this idea that if you are opposing this game, you're going to be a racist, which is really kind of a tired tactic that I don't really think works anymore. It's been played out. People just kind of like, whatever. If that's what you call everyone else who disagrees with you, move on. You have no power, really. And then the one thing I have seen, I feel like the tactics and narrative have shifted a little bit. And Mark kind of touched on this too. Is the game really woke? Is the game really woke? Well, it is woke because Sweet Baby Inc. worked on it, and Sweet Baby Inc.'s whole purpose, it's on their website, is to push woke ideology. We've seen interviews with Kim Belair where she admits that her purpose with her company is to push woke ideology. So yes, the game is woke because Sweet Baby Inc. worked on it. But that is the latest narrative I have seen being pushed. Is this game really woke? Should we give this game a fair chance? And it's like, well, that's the whole point of Cabrutus's list, is that all of these games are games that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on. Obviously, he's expanded it now to other organizations. So I think on his DEI Detected website, he has Black Girl Gamers and Gamer X as other kind of Sweet Baby Inc. style consultancy groups. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, I see the list as a boycott list. And if Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on it, don't buy it, because Sweet Baby Inc. is woke, and they've admitted that they push woke ideology.
Yeah, you can't be an innocent actor in here when you choose to spend money that you don't have as an indie dev on a consulting firm that's supposed to consult you on woke ideology and be a sensitivity reader. That was a conscious choice, and you had to, especially as an indie game, you don't have a lot of money to make the game. Why are you spending it on a consulting agency, especially since you're already a Kenyan creator? You shouldn't need consulting or sensitivity reading for any of this. So that doesn't make any sense at all. And so anybody who goes out and hires SBI is I think a willful actor in this, and should be, and consumers should be informed of that and make a decision based on it.
Yeah, like I said, it's very hard to convince me that these games are not going to, or these developers are not going to do this. We talked about this before, John, myself, and Cabrutus, how Sweet Baby Inc.'s website, if I'm being generous, is 80% all about DEI. It's what they say in every step of the process. They want to offer consultancy to people who are developers that are also in favor of DEI. They want to give you resources to get hired if you're non-white, essentially. And to say that they're going to just all of a sudden start doing something different in this game is ludicrous. And the levels at which people will go in this space to disguise or mask what they purport to be their own wonderful views. Like, the reason why they're doing this is because they say that it's the right thing to do. The representation matters, that these things, we need to represent marginalized communities. But then when they do it and the mirror is shined back at them, they're just like, we don't actually do that, you guys. So I don't know where you're getting that from. It's just written all over our website. I wanted to bring up, I'm having trouble finding this streamer that called the whole backlash against Zau racist, and he responded to you, Mark, earlier today. What was this guy's name?
Mighty Keef.
Yes.
Oh yeah, Mighty Keef.
There it is.
He was trying very, very hard to say, I wasn't calling anyone racist, but if you look at his entire thread, it was taking selective examples and trying to paint the whole.
Well, when he says right here that, oh, maybe you have to, I think in order to get the proper funds from shareholders, certain things need to be checked off. Consulting with Sweet Baby Inc. might be one of them. Okay, so there you go. You're saying that in order to get money for something, you're going to need to follow their weird narrative. And like you said,
well, that confirms everything we've been talking about that we were told was a conspiracy theory, right? We were going out there talking about ESG, about DEI funding, about why you can't get money unless you check the boxes. And they said, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. And then now he's going, well, actually, in order to get the money, you need to check the boxes.
The sphere of Sweet Baby Inc. has made a lot of them so irrational that they start firing shots in the dark, no matter who it hits. This game, this is this game is all right. We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. This game is a story about a black culture made by a black man. There's no forced diversity and inclusion in this. There is no diversity, equity, inclusion. These are the type of people using DEI as a scapegoat to mask their racism. There it is. And as we sit here and we talk about, us three and Cabrutas, Brazilian, white, Asian, it's all racism somehow. I don't understand. When are you allowed to have a problem with something and it not be racist? That's a question that I like to ask. And is this something that would be okay on the other side? Is another question I like to ask. Is it okay if I go to Japan or Korea and I say, you know what, guys, the games that you're making don't have enough white people in them. They don't represent my culture in your country or even in your part of the world, and we need to make it so that I feel represented in these games. I think that rightfully I would be, booted out or laughed at or something to that regard in other countries, but for some reason it's okay here to demand in a very weird way that, people in certain amounts of games need to look like me. I think that's very weird.
Kim Belair would say she has in her 2019 game developer conference speech, she actually brings up an example of a company she was working with where they wanted to, I guess, diversify their cast, and they suggested a Frenchman with a toupee and striped, not a toupee, a French hat, and like the striped shirt and everything like that. And she was like, "That's not good enough. It needs to be a person of color." So she would say that no, that's unacceptable. Only goes one way.
It's colonialism, right? It's what they rail against. It's like, oh, the white patriarchy has imposed themselves upon the world. And yet, if you look, it's always, the liberal white patriarchy tried to impose its views along the world. Game development in Asia has always had a ton of women in it. I've been through so many studios in China and Korea, and it's just staffed with women, and they don't care. They're making great games, and they have sexy avatars, and no one had any problem, right? And yet here they're saying, no, it's totally a problem, and you need more representation in your studio, you need more representation in your games, and it's really just imposing this they call it filter, right? Their filter, which is really like goggles that only let you see one thing, right? And they're going over to Asia and trying to tell them how they should make their games, and that's something that they ostensibly are 100% against doing. Westerners should not be going into other nations and imposing their views, and yet this is exactly what they do and what they want to happen.
Mark, we're seeing that with Stellar Blade too. We see that hypocrisy with Stellar Blade and what is the Hades 2, I think, and how Eve is too sexy, but the characters in Hades 2 are totally fine, even though they're very similar.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean that's just. You could just compare the screenshots, and they're wearing less in Hades, and yet they're coming out with articles saying, well, it doesn't have jiggle physics, and they're static pictures, they're not animated, so it's really much more tasteful. They're wearing nothing. I mean, you almost see nipple in some of this, and in other games they allow full nudity. Look at Cyberpunk, right? Look at Cyberpunk. You can have junk showing in Cyberpunk, but oh my gosh, you can't show a little bit of cleavage or too much hip in Stellar Blade. It's completely asinine.
Mark, I wanted to ask you about the before times when you were working on these other games. What was the environment like there? You mentioned a little bit about it, because what we hear a lot from some of these, ultra progressive sources is that, this was always a problem, but it just wasn't talked about. And they almost like to act as if, certain types, like there were no black TV shows or movies with black people in them before, I don't know, 2016. It's sort of like when Jennifer Lawrence said that she was the first female action movie star, and that was from like 2013 or something, is she said that she was the first one. What was it like in the before times, I'll call it again? Was there any discussion of anything like this? Was there anything like, we need to make this person look more white or more Asian or anything like that?
Zero. There was no discussion, and we didn't have applicants. I mean, women were just not into the industry at a time where the industry wasn't a super big moneymaker and super popular cultural trope. These things are important when you want to reach the mass market, right? And especially women, they want it to be socially acceptable, and gaming was not socially acceptable back then. So we didn't, we didn't talk about it at all, and we were actually thrilled if we had a woman applying for a position, or or a person of color or anything else. It's like, I mean, it wasn't the celebration we have today, but there was no thought given to it. It's like, oh, this is cool. What can you do? That's all that mattered. At Blizzard, it was always, we didn't even care about your degree, right? It was, do you have a passion for games? Do you play games a lot? And what have you done in your spare time to create skills to help make games? And you didn't have to have a degree. I mean, Chris Metzen was a watch repairman at Sears, okay? And, Bill Roper, producer at Blizzard, he was a tile salesman. And Samwise Didier, art director at Blizzard, was a movie usher. We just didn't care. There was no gates at all. This is a total myth, a complete fabrication that somehow imagines that this time was something that it was not. So yeah, that's what the before times was like. And now, of course, you have to go through multiple hoops, and everyone's walking on eggshells, and you have HR and DEI directives and quotas that you have to fill. And it's not about if you play games, if you're passionate about games. It's not about if you have any skills to make games. It's, do you check the boxes? And it's a very hypersensitive discussion whenever you hire someone. That's completely what they imagine it was back then, but they have imposed and created today in the opposite direction against white male developers specifically.
John, let's go back to this chart that I was talking about. The Zau peak amount of players on its release. How indicative of this to a person like me who doesn't, I'm not as learned as you guys are, and how indicative of this of how the game will actually perform its concurrent players upon its launch, or this close to its launch?
Yeah, I doubt that it'll go up. I mean, if you look at past releases, usually the launch day is the highest peak concurrence. You can look at Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. You can look at things like Marvel's Avengers. You can look at any kind of game. Usually the launch day on Steam is the highest that you'll see with peak concurrent, and then it will go down. You might see some peaks when it has a sale or something like that. It gets it's a lot cheaper than what maybe the initial pricing was, so you'll have more people buying in, or there's some kind of promotional going on. Obviously, what's happening with Fallout, you see the television show is really kind of picked up what the player base of Fallout 76, and I think Fallout 4 as well, and even Fallout New Vegas is seeing a lot more people hopping in and playing because they watch the show. It's on people's minds, so they're picking up their old games and checking that out. Same thing with The Witcher, things like that. You'll see kind of peaks when you have something else happening that ties into that. But this is not good for this game. Likely sales are really bad. I think the other chart shows that sales are somewhere between less than 1,000 and less than 5,000. Obviously, these are early estimates. We only have about 2-3 days worth of data. And so these analytics companies that are trying to crunch those numbers don't have like the full data to like work with that. But I would say they're probably losing quite a bit of money on this, especially given the fact that what Mark said, that it took them 15 years to develop this. So who knows how much money has been sunk into this game that they probably are not going to recover. And this is an EA original game too, so they probably got some of that DEI funding from EA through EA Originals.
This is a dead game. This is you when you launch a game, the Steam launch is your big push, and then you can only go down from there until your next major content update. The only thing that can save you if this happens to you is if it becomes picked up by streamers and becomes popular on Twitch, and that is a very narrow type that has to appeal to what we call the over-the-shoulder crowd back in the day. It has to have visual appeal just to watch someone play. And I don't see that happening here. So unless they, release a major content update or they have something up their sleeve, that number will not go up.
That should be
Yeah,
incredible. Look,
and you could
490
already
people
see
watching this.
Look, the other thing you should look at is that yesterday, I mean, Cabrutus's tweet had 3.5 million impressions, and there was so much activity, and so many people on Twitter were saying, I can't wait to play this game. This game is going to be amazing. Well, if you look at Master of TDS, he has an analysis showing that almost all of that was bot traffic, either purchased by EA or somebody else, and you had nothing but bots yesterday gushing about this game and how they were going to play it. And surprise, surprise, it was all manufactured. There's nobody playing this game. That was all fake.
That it's gonna come back around. Now I saw you say something to the effect of a couple weeks ago. Well, I read it a couple weeks ago. I think it was something you said a while ago, that there was 2 years is what was needed to, you know, sort of put these larger AAA companies in their place. 2 years of not purchasing their products. You want to expand on that a little bit? What are you basing that off of? Just, you know, the amount of money they would lose, or if the ESG money is coming to an end anyways?
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff happened, and the diversity, equity, inclusion, and the sustainability stuff, the ESG stuff, came in around COVID time, right? Around that time, 2019, 2020, that's when you had big funding come in with strings attached. You had to have DEI departments. You had to have a board composition of a certain character, of enough POCs on them, and the right POCs. You know, Hispanic was not enough. You had to get someone else in there. So this is when all of that happened, and you had this huge influx and changes in departments and everything else, because these games are super expensive to make. And so that's where all the funding was. But that has gone away. ESG is still around. It's moved more towards sustainability and other sectors like real estate. And the ESG money, the cheap money, just isn't there in games anymore. So now CEOs and studio heads are telling me cash is king. Your game has to sell. Your game has to bring in profits. And they've been doing mass layoffs in the industry because they had too many games during the COVID era where people were basically at home with nothing to do and buying up games left and right. And they need to do something about it. So now is the time where they are very vulnerable, and they're paying attention to whether or not their games are selling. So as a consumer, if you want to send a message, this is the perfect time to do so, because they can't rely on the cheap money anymore. They have to sell games. And if you don't buy the games because they are being abusive to customers through their monetization, or if they're being excessively woke and you don't like that, this is the perfect time. And basically, it's a siege mentality. You can run out the timer on them if you don't buy these games for 2 years. And so that's why I'm saying consumers have extremes amount of leverage right now that they should be using to change things in AAA for the better.
And I just want to point out that we're already seeing evidence of this. Obviously, Embracer Group shut down Volition after the Saints Row debacle. Clearly, did not make enough sales on that, and that studio has been shut down. And then Luminous was also kind of consumed into Square Enix after Forspoken was an utter abysmal failure. And then you can just look at Embracer Group; they're splitting the company into 3 after they've seen a number of their games kind of fail. Obviously, Saints Row and Volition being one of them. They had to sell off Saber to Matthew Karch in his Beacon Interactive, who was the former, or I guess he was the interim chief operating officer at Embracer during their transition there last year. And then they just sold off Gearbox as well. And now they just announced they're splitting the company into 3 different sections. So, and like what Mark's saying, we're seeing layoffs across the board, looking at Microsoft. I mean, it's just, all these companies are having huge layoffs because they weren't prioritizing good finances.
It's highly likely that Embracer was a leveraged play, right? The idea is that you borrow a lot of cheap money at low interest rates, at ESG and DEI interest rates, and you go out and you buy massive amounts of studios to try to form another EA. I think, I don't have their financials in front of me, but I suspect if you had access to them and you looked, you would find out that they were upside down on their loans. They'd taken out these giant loans in order to buy these companies, and now they have to sell them at fire sale prices to get out of it. So it's brutal. The other thing that's happening is even Microsoft's affected. Microsoft and Blizzard canceled BlizzCon this year. That's unheard of, right? And BlizzCon never made money. It is an extremely expensive show to produce. When I was there, we didn't make money on BlizzCon at all, and it was always a huge expense, but you did it because it was a huge marketing event for the game and for the company. And so BlizzCon is canceled now, and that's Microsoft stepping in and saying, "Hey, no, we can't lose money. Everything we do has to make money." And this is the current mentality in AAA games, the current financial reality that they're facing.
Yeah, and we just saw Take-Two announce layoffs as well, and I was looking at some of their finances. They're losing like hundreds of millions of dollars last year. I can't believe how some of these companies operate when they're operating at these like massive losses every year. I mean, I think it was something like 5% of their entire assets they lost just last year. It was crazy.
They're harnessing all their creativity. The same thing has happened in the news world in both the United States and Canada. We saw the layoffs with, Vice has plummeted for a very long time in very different ways and was bought off by other people. But, the BuzzFeed news department closing, the Now This is, and other places that are really out there that receive funding from larger corporations. Sports Illustrated. Now, people are going to tell you that it's all because the magazines aren't doing well, but a lot of these places are propped up by larger publishers and organizations that they saw value in them in terms of what they could push to people, and they're just not seeing that value anymore. And because people aren't buying into this a lot of stuff, it's not working. And up here in Canada, they gave hundreds of millions of dollars to outlets. The government did hundreds of millions of dollars as long as you agreed to print certain things and say certain things. And this goes down to trade magazines, to political publications, to lifestyle magazines. There is a Pizza Monthly and a Classic Fire Truck Monthly, I'm not kidding, that received government money in order to stay open during COVID. And now all this stuff is drying up, just like you guys have said. And the ideological backing just isn't there anymore because everybody's losing money hand over foot in so many different ways in this economy, and then of course ideologically as well. The next thing I wanted to bring up with you guys is the hard R, and I don't mean I want to say it. I'm saying Stellar Blade, and this is now confirmed. They removed the in-game graffiti and they replaced it with Crimer, which I guess is sort of funny if that was the original thing. But, Mark, let me ask you, who makes this decision? Who says the narrative that we have racist, I guess, in-game graffiti? Who's saying that narrative within a story is racist? And is there, this is the wild thing, is they can say that this narrative in the game is bad, right? The idea that somebody wrote this in a game on a wall to make a racist statement, but they can't square themselves with the idea that they are purposely putting racist narratives in other video games at the same time. So one way it's okay, but the other way it's not. But who makes this decision? Is this Sony themselves that are saying you can't have this in there?
Well, let's look at it from a game design perspective a little bit first. Our shop is, I guess, a shop in the game where you can buy upgrades and equipment and that sort of stuff, and they're sprinkled around the maps of the game, right? So it's not related to the hard graffiti at all. That's the first thing to realize. The other thing is we use decals all the time in games to break up repeating textures and to introduce visual variety. So the hard thing is actually a decal that's plastered onto that wall, and it's used everywhere in the game in multiple places in order to sort of reduce the visual sameness of stuff. And so this is just a coincidental decal that they put on the wall next to a very common shop in the game, and you'll see this in other places in the game too, this hard decal repeated throughout the city. And this is a completely accidental happenstance. And what happened was somebody journalists and content creators got digital access to the game early so they could review it, analyze it, and have their content ready for launch tomorrow, right? Game launches tomorrow. And so what happened was somehow this image got circulated and journalists picked up on it, and journalists decided to bring it to the attention of Sony. So they're the ones who got offended, first of all. This is, you have to remember, Sony's playing this game. They have groups of testers that are going through this every day while they're going through what Nintendo calls lock check, right? Different companies have different names for it. But this is sort of like the last sort of like scan that you do of the game before it goes out to the public. So they didn't have a problem with this until the journalists and content creators brought it up somehow. And then what they did is they all got together and they all complained to Sony, who's the publisher, first party publisher of the game, right? And they're the ones that went to Shift Up and said, this has got to change. And that's one thing I want to point out is that Shift Up does not get to decide, right? If a console maker who controls the platform says change it, or we won't, you have to do it or they won't ship the game. They won't release it. So you're caught between a rock and a hard place. And this makes it very difficult because as a developer, you don't have any sort of agency and choice. And what could have happened here was Sony was fine with it up until this point. They saw everything in the game. I guarantee you, their entire playtest crews have been through this game with a fine-tooth comb, done replays many, many, many times, and never said a thing until the journalists complained. At that point, that's when they had to change it. So that's where it came from. It went from the journalists and the content creators to Sony down to Shift Up, and it was a do this or else.
That is wild. That there's just a happenstance that it was placed all over the game, and somebody saw this and says, "We got to do something about this, you guys. We can't have this."
And just to add on to this, they actually went to Sony beforehand because it looks like, I mean, this is the first thing that IGN kind of published on this. Aside from their review, they published it at the same time. Australian content creator published a similar screenshot on X as well. And Mark can probably talk to this. Like, if a journalist is reaching out to you, you're probably not going to get back to them immediately with a statement and then have the word patched almost simultaneously. So this was probably given to Sony ahead of time. They had days to like maybe work on the patch or whatever, fix it up, and then they ran this the minute the embargo dropped as well.
It looks completely coordinated. They had to have brought this up to Sony. Sony had to have the patch ready. It takes, look, even if it's a line of code that you change, and here it's not even code. An artist had to just take one sticker off and put another sticker on, okay? But that sounds like it can be done immediately, but you don't understand. If anything changes in the game, anything small, it triggers a complete retest of the game because you don't know what else, what sort of repercussions it had throughout these very complicated code systems, right? So whenever you make any change to a game, it gets removed from lockdown status into retest. And so there had to have been at least a 24-hour retest cycle of the entire build before it would be ready to be patched. You not only have to test the art change, you have to test everything in the game, and you have to test a new download and a new build to make sure that it's installing correctly, the whole 9 yards, involving hundreds of people. So this cannot happen in 30 minutes, right? This cannot happen where Kotaku and IGN say, oh, look, there's a problem. This just came to light. And then 30 minutes later, there's a patch. That's a technical impossibility. So this was a coordinated attack on the game by journalists who, because they saw the popular momentum about it, have to jump on the bandwagon and be like, and which I called, by the way, I said, this is exactly what's going to happen, is that once they know the game is popular, journalists will change their tune. But they still had to get their dig in. And this was their chance to attack the game and to get back at the chuds.
And remember, IGN does have reason to kind of get back at them because they already attacked them earlier through their IGN France affiliate, and seemingly had to, like, Sony came to them and was like, what are you even doing here? They issued the retraction, issued the apology, and they even like took away the name of the guy who wrote it, and it just now just reads like IGN staff or something like that. So IGN clearly has some animus against this game.
So there's another controversial thing that isn't confirmed yet, if I'm correct, Mark, where they're now changing their Final Fantasy-ing Stellar Blade. Now they're changing the outfits. Is that true? And what was the alleged problem here? That the thing goes up too high there?
So yeah, if you look at that's the outfit as it used to be, apparently. We don't know yet because we don't have the game in our hands. And what's circulating now in screenshots and videos is that the chest area is covered up and the hips have been lowered so that it's less it rides up less on the hip. First of all, let's talk about the hypocrisy here. Cyberpunk, full frontal male female nudity, no problem for Sony. Okay, swimsuit, a little too much skin showing, big problem for an Asian game. Okay, this is completely a double standard. So let's just get that out there first. But what's causing the confusion here is that people are posting different information. Yeah, this is another suit where they added a cloth panel up her midsection that is absent in the trailer for the image, right? And again, another thing to point out is Sony knew all this. They approved the trailers. That stuff goes through marketing. They approved the bills with that in it. Suddenly, at the 11th hour, only after the journalists get their hands on it, do we see these potential edits. Now, people are saying they may not be edits at all, that these might just be lower level of the outfits. And when you play New Game Plus, that you can unlock them. Nobody knows for sure. But I think I can explain why there's multiple versions out there and people are saying, no, my screenshots earlier and my screenshot shows that it was censored and my screenshot shows that it was not censored. You have to understand we're looking at different screenshots from different builds of the game. And there's three out there. One is the physical media itself, okay? This would be the first available version of the game that was good enough to ship that gets sent out usually 4 to 6 weeks early to manufacturers for duplication. And in Sony's case, you have to have their encryption. So you have to use their duplicator and their encryption process to get it on the PS5. So that would be one potential area where if somebody in retail, say, and some of this stuff may have come from retailers who had physical copies of the game early, they could have had the physical disc and they could have had an earlier version of the outfits. The one that the journalists received was a digital download. Okay, it was distributed digitally. That may have been an early version too, or it may have already had the censorship changes. So you have some content creators going out there saying, no, it wasn't censored. Look, I was playing this 2 weeks ago and it was covered up, right? But that is easily explained by the fact that an earlier physical version would not have had those changes. Lastly, both of those could be wrong, and maybe it was completely uncensored until the hard R patch, right? That emergency day one patch that dropped yesterday that changed the hard R to crime R, which is hilarious of itself, and also affected these outfits. So that's what we don't know. And that's where the confusion comes from. And we don't know what's going to happen until it's in gamers' hands tonight and tomorrow. I believe Europe's going to get it tonight. And people are starting to play through NG Plus, New Game Plus, in order to see if these are further unlocks or different outfits. So the reason why this is so controversial is this. It wouldn't be a big deal except that Shift Up, the developers, gave interviews, and it was news a couple of days ago that the game would be fully uncensored worldwide. And this is very, very unfortunate for them because they came out and said this, and now gamers are like, that's a lie, right? And we are very, very upset. And this is very difficult for Shift Up because if Sony made them change it, they could have they get caught in a lie almost by accident, right? So Sony was fine with it up until the very last moment, and then the journalists get their hands on it or whatever, and it changes, or somebody at Sony decides to change it, and now they're caught in a lie. So this looks very bad for them.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine that any of this stuff would happen with one of the games that were sort of like pre-approved, as you're mentioning. The Cyberpunk was a game that was virtually unplayable when it came out, and you don't hear anything about that except for how much better it's gotten. You don't hear anybody having a problem with that. And the same thing happens with most things. Something gets too successful, and there needs to be a reason. If a person has shown any sort of resistance to the machine, the powers that be, there has to be something that can tear them down. I mean, you look at something is completely unrelated is the WNBA. That Caitlin Clark girl was the biggest star for 3 weeks or something, and now she's begun the phase where she's no longer a media darling and she is under attack. Anything that becomes something larger than life in a sense, somebody's working to take it down, and it's a shame when somebody like I'm forgetting his name now. I don't Taehyung the over there at Shift Up.
Taehyung Kim, yeah,
exactly. When he starts talking about the fact that we don't want our games to be like Western games, we want them to be uniquely South Korean. We want them to, be a sort of fantasy and escape for people. These are all things that he said, and somebody out there, at least a dozen people or something out there are just like, no, we can't have that. We're going to find something wrong with it. And this is what they have to go and do. They have to take screenshots of stuff and send it to Sony. We have a problem with the hip rise of a bathing suit. Like I mentioned, the same thing happened with Final Fantasy. We're going back and redoing things that were already approved. And like you mentioned about Stellar Blade, this was a huge game, Final Fantasy Rebirth. A gigantic game, years in the making, and everybody's clamoring for it, and it gets released, and then all of a sudden we have to go back and say, not only do we have to censor stuff in this, but in the first version, I believe as well, in the flashback scene, and it just becomes to that point where I'm sort of asking, like, is this really what we're still doing? Are we not moving in this direction where, if you don't like it, don't play it, sort of thing? Is there any benefit of the doubt we can give them, you guys, where it's like this is a normal thing and a concern that people might have, and there's a reason for this?
Yeah, I got asked a very difficult question today on Twitter, and it was this. It's like, because I was saying, listen, my position is that in the culture wars, we need to stick together with our allies, right? And not everybody is completely free to move 100% in the real world, right? And this came up with Niche Gamer when they said that they couldn't cover certain things. And I said, listen, they're on our side. They're fighting the good fight. Everyone fights to the best of their ability. So long as they fight, I'm happy. So I said, I'm going to buy the game. I pre-ordered it, actually. It's arriving hopefully tomorrow morning. And and I'm fine with that. And I understand the realities and the difficulties of censorship, because here's the difficult question. Why would I support Shift Up when they censored costumes in the game, when I'm anti-censorship, versus something like Games Workshop when they changed the custodies to be female, or perhaps one of these other companies that have enlisted SBI to work on their game? And I can tell you this: the difference is this: they're on our side. They're doing the most of all game developers out there to push back on the woke stuff and the censorship stuff out there to the best of their ability. And they essentially are forced by Sony. They don't have a choice when it comes down to the censorship at the end. There are people saying that, oh, they could have chosen not to go exclusive with Sony. And it's like, listen, let's be in the real world here. If Sony was offering the money to make the game, and they were offering the best money and the best opportunity, and they were fine with your builds, and they told you everything was fine, which up until yesterday we had no reason to believe that Sony wasn't fine with it, then you're going to go with Sony. And that's just the reality of it. They don't have a choice right now at the 11th hour to be like, hey, we told people no censorship. We don't want to censor the game now, even though you're telling us at the last minute. Contrast that with Games Workshop, who chose to make female custodies, who is not on your side, who very much wants to change the franchise into something that nerds hate in order to score brownie points or do whatever self-destructive thing they want to do. They don't have a publisher. Games Workshop goes direct to their customers. Same thing with any company that hires SBI to work on their game. We pointed this out earlier. A little indie studio definitely should not be spending extra money on woke consultancies. If they are, that's a conscious choice, a painful choice, a monetary choice for a developer to do so. And that means that there has to be a political alignment there. So there is political alignment with these SBI games. There is political alignment with Games Workshop. But what we have with Shift Up is actually a huge voice in our favor. And you know what? they're going to take some hits, right? They're going to take some hits. They have to do some censorship. But like I said on a tweet earlier today, it is ridiculous to throw away the war because you might have taken some casualties, rumored casualties. We don't have any confirmation yet, just because you might have taken some casualties along the way. As long as you're fighting, as long as you're on the side against this stuff, we need to rally around. We need to support, because if they make money, guess what? They can, and they get leverage. They can go back to Sony and change things. Look at what happened with Larian Studios, right? They were not going to be on what the lower end Xbox. Which one is that? Xbox One S or whatever. They changed that whole policy within Microsoft because of the popularity of the game. So if Shift Up gets that popularity, they can be the tool of change within the larger industry to make this stuff more accepted, where right now it's being censored left and right.
John, why does this point of view, and if we go off of this screenshot here that we're looking at, not saying it's confirmed, this is somebody saying it's the two different versions, and it's just, you know, the cut of the bathing suits lower. This point of view that I think it's fair to argue that is a progressive point of view that has a problem with this. This is the same point of view that says, you know, respect sex workers. You know, prostitution is what is wonderful and should be welcomed everywhere. And, you know, post your body on the internet for everybody to see, and you can't have a problem with that. Why is this the sort of the route that they're going down? Like, is this because this is the only thing they can find, or is there something that I'm not seeing here that that I'm just blind to as to why they're saying, you know, we can't make these characters sexy, even though we fight for this daily to be able to present this stuff in real life?
I think Mark's actually talked about this a little bit earlier, and we brought it up earlier when you have the hypocrisy with Hades 2 and Stellar Blade, where obviously Hades 2 has more titillization than Stellar Blade does, and they're totally fine with that. I think it's that Stellar Blade is actually appealing to the people that they hate, so they want to hate that game. I think that's really what it comes down to. I know it's not really deep or not elaborating on it, but I think it's just that simple.
Well, Hades is marketed as a diverse game, right? Is marketed as an LGBTQ friendly game, and so the politics are on their side. And again, when the politics are on their side, the other side is very good at supporting them no matter what. And what the more conservative side, I don't want to say conservative, because skimpy bathing outfits are not necessarily on the conservative agenda, right? But
I agree.
Let's just say that the anti-censorship crowd and everything else, I would say that our principles, because we have kind of like a code of ethics, when that's crossed for monetary gain or monetary reality, we get a little skittish about that, because we have a very strong sort of moral code, right? Well, whether it's pro speech or, you know, whatever it is. And so I think that actually is a detriment to our side of things, you know, our collective side, because we won't instantly rally and support and defend each other. But we are at a point now where if they fracture us, they will win. And we are on the cusp of turning the tide. And we should adopt some of this solidarity techniques and hang together to push back collectively.
Mark, remind me to put you in charge of the raid of the planet Klandathu. You're very good at rallying the troops. They should put you in the new...
Everybody fights. Nobody quits.
They put you in the new game. You know, I actually came across somebody recently who said they didn't like Starship Troopers, and I was aghast. It was on TV for the 9 millionth time. I was watching it, of course. It was my dad who was one of the people. He was like, "Oh, this movie's stupid." I was like, "Hold on a second."
Oh, yeah. The great movie. Unintentionally great movie.
Yeah. Is there anything else going on?
It's like Alan Moore and with Watchmen, right? They're trying to critique something and they end up creating something that people rally around.
Yeah, exactly. The bug planet will never stop being the mortal enemy of the, you know, Buenos Aires as a motorcycle drives by. Is there anything else we want to cover, or do we want to stop it here? We're all looking around.
I'm trying to think of what's been happening the past couple of days here. I'm going to check my Twitter feed real quick.
Well, where are we at on the Warhammer stuff? That has hit a couple of my friends very hard. And, you know, I know what Warhammer is. I'm not inept. And, you know, I had plans. I've been clamoring for the new game coming out in September, just frothing at the mouth for it. And then this stuff starts happening, and they're literally going back and changing their own lore in real time in front of people, and they don't even care.
No, we have heresy legions amongst the wiki editors and amongst the journalists out there that are running these like BOLS and other websites. They are heretics. They are heretics, and they're burning Warhammer down in real time, as you said. They are going back. It's one thing to retcon the lore and say, oh, you know, we're changing it to be new, but it's another thing to go back and say it never happened, and to go even further and to edit the actual text of what you're quoting and what the emperor has said himself. Heresy, heresy, heresy.
Well, they changed the Brotherhood of something to just, what did they change that one to?
Brotherhood of Demigods, yeah, to Order, I think is what
Right.
it says now.
Order of Demigods, and the emperor from these men to these warriors.
You have to change the word God.
Slanesh cultists.
Look, this is super important. I gotta say this. Listen, 40K is as yet untainted as an IP. Yeah, it's got some hits there, but they're minor, and they are closest to the ethos of, you know, basically the freedom to be evil, right? And then there's no good side in Warhammer 40K. It's a grim, dark universe, and this is the last bastion IP in some ways in tabletop, right? Tabletops is hugely infested with this woke stuff. This is the time to get upset. This is the time to push back. When they go this far and they change the custodies and they edit all the lore and they gaslight and lie to you about it, now is the time, because it is a small change, because they can walk it back. If you do not push back now, you will be in the same position Marvel is. You will be in the same position Star Wars is. And you will be on the back foot with your franchise destroyed a year from now. Fight now. Now is the time to do it.
I agree. 100%.
And as we speak, they're destroying Tomb Raider as we speak as well. And you talk about the tabletop there. That was outrageous as well. If we want to touch on that, I don't know if wait, no, we talked about that, but tell the people, Mark and John, the board game in and of itself said that its very own lore of Lara Croft was colonialist and had to survive the wounds of a nation ravaged by colonialism. They even went as far and say that raiding was bad. And it's like, we don't know stealing is mean or bad. How dare she steal things that she doesn't have a cultural ownership of? How dare she go to other cultures and steal from them and then brag about it? What is a Tomb Raider? Just cancel the game. And this is a bigger problem that I'm seeing with a lot of things. And Tomb Raider made me think of this. And there is, and when they change certain movies and change certain lores and say that what we've been doing is racist, this is my biggest problem with it, is they will say that it's racist. Evil Hat will go out and say that H.P. Lovecraft is the worst guy in the world. I'm not defending him. That's just what they say. But at the same time, they will put out and profit off the content. So on one hand, the thing that we're writing about and the thing that we're doing a game on, or a board game on, or a video game about, is racist and bad and colonialist and has all these bad themes. But, you know, you still pay for it. I mean, I still got to make money off it. Why would you guys not pay for it? Like, it's okay if they make money off of racism, but if you enjoy it, then you're a piece of crap. Like, what is that?
So it's a lot of times, I think it is this woke ideology that has infected so many people. I mean, it is a religion for a lot of people, and that's kind of them exerting their morals, their quote unquote moral superiority against the previous kind of moral dynamic. And basically what they're trying to do, especially like, I mean, Tomb Raider is a really good example with the tabletop game from Evil Hat. They're completely changing what the entire franchise is. They're saying that basically Lara Croft's profession is evil. She's an evil colonialist. She's basically the villain, but they still want you to play her. So it becomes basically this humiliation ritual where you know that all of this stuff is wrong, what they're doing to it is bad, and you should like reject it. but they think that you're so tied into the IP, and what they want you to do is they want you to actually play it, buy it, spend your money, and then quote unquote and try to enjoy it even though you know this stuff is wrong, so that they now have power over you. You've submitted to them, you've bought into their new moral dynamic even though you know that it is wrong. So that just becomes a massive humiliation ritual for you, because you do know that that it is wrong, but nevertheless you've chosen to do that. And they've done this with numerous properties, but I think the Evil Hat Productions thing is so egregious. It's so obvious. It's really easy to kind of explain that through that game.
You're absolutely right. And at some point, if you change the core fundamental tenets of the IP, you no longer have that IP. It's something else, something that wasn't popular, that was never popular, and you are completely tank your sales. And this is the risk that 40K runs as well, Warhammer 40K. If they do this change with the Custodies and extrapolate it to the Space Marines and everything else in the game, you no longer have 40K. You no longer have the grim dark future. You have the rainbow and unicorn future, and that absolutely destroy the franchise. It's different. It's completely different, and that's why these changes are important, because you need to be faithful to the core tenets of the lore that made you successful in the first place. And this is me with my CEO hat on. This makes no sense, and it can only be explained by now that the financial incentives are removed. It's because they let in all these activists that are completely cultists and think this certain way, right? So you have a situation here where you're making financially disastrous decisions because you are held hostage. And this has happened before. Back when Twitter and Jack Dorsey was in charge of Twitter, I used to read his tweets very closely, and he was actually against some of the censorship and what was happening, but he was effectively held hostage by his own co-executives, as well as the rest of the company and his friends in Silicon Valley, because they're all very woke. So when you're in that position, it's kind of a lose scenario. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO. There's a ton of pressure there to sort of conform, even to the destruction of your business. And that is the lunacy that we're facing now, is that these decisions are not rational. These decisions do not make money. These decisions do not please consumers. It is lose-lose. So why would you do that unless you were a cult ideology?
Yeah, and Mark he brought up Star Wars earlier, and I think that's the perfect example to kind of see where all this leads, right? We have Kathleen Kennedy telling us in 2015 that she was going to be injecting feminist ideology into Star Wars during a Fortune magazine Women in Power conference, and she basically goes through how, like, she and the Walt Disney Company were working together to bring in all of these feminist activists into Star Wars. She was bragging about how they were doing that. And you can see that what has Star Wars become? It's no longer really Star Wars anymore. It's completely different. You used to have a very black and white, good and evil morality in the actual story. I mean, you had the Sith, you had the Jedi. The Sith were bad. The Jedi were good. The Sith was a corruption. The dark side was a corruption of the Force, and you had to remove that in order to bring balance. Now they've kind of created this yin yang kind of thing where you have to have balance between the dark side and the light side, and it's no longer Star Wars anymore. So this stuff, when you bring in these activists, it does indeed affect the story, the lore, and it completely changes and warps it into something completely different. And I think Star Wars, and you can look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well, perfect examples of what this ideology does, and how it basically just destroys once successful, once dominant storytelling and IPs.
Yeah, you don't have to be versed in the lore at all. In fact, they don't want you to be. So many, and this, you can really look to Hollywood for this. They love the fact on The Witcher that they didn't really pay much attention to the games or the novels or anything else. They love it. They want to hire more of you because they want to tell their own stories and insert it into the skin suit of the IP which they have appropriated. They love this. And they don't want anybody sitting there like Henry Cavill saying, this isn't faithful to the books. This isn't faithful to the game. So the last thing that Tomb Raider wants is anybody who loved the original Tomb Raider games. That franchise is dead because they're saying now, Crystal Dynamics is saying that they are taking inspiration from the tabletop in order to do similar changes to the video game franchise. Yep, there it is. That's just dead. It is a dead game walking. It is a skin suit. They don't want anybody who loves Tomb Raider. In fact, if you love Tomb Raider, they just want you out.
And who is Crystal Dynamics and Tomb Raider? I think Tomb Raider's Embracer Group now, right? Who are they actually working with? They're working with Amazon Games, right? And what has Amazon done? They've destroyed Wheel of Time. They've destroyed Lord of the Rings, and it looks like they are the ones behind a lot of this Warhammer 40K stuff. If you believe the rumor out there that says that Amazon was the one wanting them to make female Space Marines, and Games Workshop basically, I guess conceded with the Custodes.
No polygons allowed.
And the CFO dumped most of her shares. Nearly $1 million. That's a huge vote of no confidence. I've heard some BS out there from armchair CEOs saying, "Oh, you're legally required to dump your shares if you quit the company," because she resigned in January. She's leaving the company towards the end of the year or early Q1 of next year, right? And that's not true at all. You are not required to dump your shares if you leave a company. Otherwise, executives would not join companies. I'll tell you this firsthand. That would be a bullshit deal. Oh, I'm sorry. Can I curse here? That would be a BS deal.
The perfect example of that is Ike Perlmutter. He was literally laid off by the Walt Disney Company, went and teamed up with Nelson Peltz and ran a proxy battle against him using his mass amounts of shares that he has in the Walt Disney Company that he got from the sale of Marvel Entertainment to Disney. I mean, he still has them, and he was let go last year.
Yep. And so her dumping all of these shares, the CFO of Games Workshop dumping, I think it's 3/4 of her shares at the very least. 2/3. It's a huge vote of no confidence for the company. So what does she see coming? I think she sees a couple things. One is the timing of it was pretty suspicious, with it being right when the game pushback and the Femme Custodes issue happened. But a lot of these times, these big stock moves are planned well in advance, right? So you can only give so much credence to that. I think she sees something deeper. I think she sees what's happening within the organization, how there is no longer a respect for the IP and what made the game successful. And I think she also sees the rise of 3D printing and how that's going to eat into it. Because you have to understand, Games Workshop is a toy company. They're not a gaming company. They're a toy company, and the rules support the sale of miniatures. So I think that with all those factors combined, she's like, I'm out of here. That's it. I'm just going to keep a toehold in case things change. But everything she sees as CFO, you see everything in the company. She sees some really bad stuff that we haven't even seen yet. I guarantee you there is more stuff that she knows that we don't know yet.
And I think there's also what you kind of touched on earlier with all of that kind of ESG DEI money that we saw injected around 2020. I mean, if you look at the stock performance of Games Workshop, it blew up over the past 5 years. I think it was over 130, maybe close to 200% increase over the past 5 years. So it's at the stock price is basically at the highest it's been. I think maybe 2019, 2020, maybe 2021 was when it was at 170. It's sitting around 120 now. So she could just be like, I'm getting out while the eating is good as well, because it's at the highest point. And like you said, it can only really kind of go down from where it's at because of all of these changes that are going to be happening to the industry that they are in.
Yeah, it's very unusual to dump that many shares. Usually the stuff is planned, and it's essentially because of insider trading laws in the US. So I don't know what regulates her in the UK. I'll first say that, right? But in the US, at least, if you're a key executive in the company, you cannot just dump 3/4 of your shares. You have to have a stock sale plan that you file with the SEC, and the shares have to be sold in tranches over time. And there's some flexibility there, but not a lot. So this is weird. I really don't know what's going on, but it means that there was basically no rule like that in the UK for her to do that. So she went ahead and did it, and that is an unusual amount of stock. So yeah, I think I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I want to know what she knows.
It's a very good point you make with the 3D printing. I'm sure that can only be getting more and more advanced as the time goes on, and it's going to probably be a gigantic problem for that industry.
Yeah, I've been looking into it. I've done 3D printing in the past, but I've not done resin printing, right? Which is what you really need for these miniatures. But there's an entire cottage industry that has sprung up with these incredibly sculpted miniature gaming figures that you can buy for $15 a month, and you get sent a half dozen files, and they are as good or better than anything Games Workshop produces in some cases. But you need one of these resin printers to print it, and they are very cheap nowadays. There's $300, $250 on sale. The only problem is they're messy, right? You've got this resin, it's like paint, it's toxic like paint. You can't dump it anywhere. And so and you can't get it on your skin. So there is some fuss with that. But I think as the technology gets better and now there's water-based resins and all this other stuff, and it gets safer and easier to do, I think that's going to be a huge factor. And so I'm actually very interested in doing a sort of like 3D tutorial series about how to get started with me, newbie Grummz, in resin printing, right? And to get away from some of this. And I've often thought before I did Ember, there was a tabletop game called Gate Striders that set in the Ember universe, right? And we shelved that because the game was far more popular, but we said we're going to come back to it. That was always going to be a 3D printed miniature game. So what we were planning to do, even back then, because I saw this coming, was that we would write the tabletop rules, but then we would provide 3D files to print with. And we do that on Ember as well. We provide 3D rewards, statues and figurines from our game that you can print if you have a printer. So I'm very interested in 3D printing technology as it gets easier to do. And these resin printers have incredible detail. These miniatures are tiny, right? They're 25 millimeters, they're an inch tall, and you need to pack in all this detail. And we finally have cheap printers that are able to do that. So if I can get more people into 3D printing, I think that that's going to apply more pressure to Games Workshop to play nice.
Oh, it keeps doing that. Well, I think we can end it there. Thank you for imparting your industry insider information on us. John, as always, thank you for being on. Next time we're gonna have to do a live stream. I was browbeaten by Mark before we came on. He said, "Why isn't this a live stream?" He sent somebody to my house. I'm pretty sure it was
the Pinkertons, just like Hasbro and D&D. I sent Pinkertons over.
Exactly.
Are you monetized?
I am.
Yeah, you're missing out on the super chats and everything, man.
Well, yeah, I need to exploit your guys' popularity to get super chats. I'm hearing you loud and clear. But yeah, until next time, thank you guys. Anything else we want to say? Put a chick in
awesome.
It, make it lame.
I really enjoyed the topics we covered. It's been animated. It's been fun. I had a really good time. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate
it. It's great. I think I just want to echo kind of what Mark said. This is the time to fight these companies. I think are probably at the weakest that they are. ESG, DEI money is drying up. We're seeing across the board. I mean, just look at the Marvel's massive box office failure. Star Wars, who even knows if they're even going to get a new film out? I mean, we're looking at 2026 for Mandalorian and Grogu, if that even comes out. Obviously, I think this is the time to go on the offensive. We're seeing massive layoffs in the video game industry. So it's time to fight now. Let's get your sword sharpened and let's go.
I would love to get one of the proponents of this stuff on here. I've contacted Sweet Baby Inc. 5-6 times. A couple of the other Evil Hat. None of these people will respond. I would love to have a little bit of a head-to-head, friendly, of course.
Well, some people say that that's because they're afraid to debate, but I think the reason is worse than that. They are so tight-knit that if they came on their show, they would be excommunicado within their community. Like, why are you platforming these people with your presence? It's a lot more insidious. It's evil. There's guilt by association. If they went on another show, they would be completely ostracized.
Yeah, novelist Brian Emaar says that they operate like a school of fish. So if if one fish doesn't follow the school, it's going to get eaten by the shark, right?
Oh, absolutely. Metaphor. And they are sharks. They are really sharks.